This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 456, featuring Jamie Beaton, founder of Crimson Education and author of Accepted: Secrets to Gaining Admission to the World's Top Universities.
Welcome to the Leadership Podcast. Jim and Jan interview leaders who are blazing new trails. They'll read the bestsellers, they study trends, they'll provide thought leadership and the latest research when it comes to inspiring and leading others. They'll get you access to the great leaders of our time and help you learn from the very best. Now your hosts, Jim Vasilopoulos and Jan Rutherford.
Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vasilopoulos, founder of Rafty Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey everybody, Jan Rutherford here, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders. And you know, our whole catalog can be found at theleadershippodcast.com, covering 455 other episodes over the past 9 years.
And many of those episodes have been sponsored by our sponsor, Darley. Their mission supports all our military and first responders with the equipment they need to ensure mission success, whether that's a water pump, a drone, or emergency medical supplies, or all kinds of things the world needs when they need it most. Learn about this fantastic company and the people supporting our nation's heroes at Darley.com. That's DARLEY.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
Thanks, Jim. And our guest today is Jamie Beaton. He's the co-founder and CEO of Crimson Education. He actually comes to us by way of a friend named Jimmy Byrne, who is terrific in his own right. And if Jimmy says we should have someone as a guest, I will take that. And Jamie is a Harvard grad in math and economics with advanced degrees in public policy, law, and education from elite schools that include Oxford, Yale, and Stanford. I think I've heard of those, Jamie. You lead the Crimson Education today with the same enthusiasm that you brought to your own university pursuits and to your early efforts helping friends achieve similar success. You know, again, your reputation is you're a giver. You're also the author of Accepted: Secrets to Gaining Admission to the World's Top Universities. And Jamie, we're really pleased to have you on the show. We've heard just nothing but great things about you, both your public reputation and your private reputation with your friends and colleagues.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here with you guys, and I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah. So what's not out on the internet about you that we could not find out on the internet, something that you're willing to divulge?
One thing that I've found extremely thrilling in recent years has been diving into this Warhammer community, which is this war game. And basically, it takes me to all these different states, from North Carolina to Pittsburgh and stuff, where I'm, meeting folks from many different walks of life. And it's the strategy board game where you essentially get these models, paint them, and you play this like 3-hour strategy. And I actually was playing in the US team last year, which involved sort of traveling over to Belgium and competing with the US guys in this kind of global tournament. So definitely taking a nerdy hobby to the extreme, but it was really fun. And it's quite a good intellectual escape. So you might find me on a Zoom call looking down, and often it's because I'm assembling one of these things on the side or painting it. And so it's a good stress reliever from my high intensity normal years of Crimson.
My grandson would love that. He's always creating his own board games. And when you play with him, you can never win because I think he makes the rules up as he goes.
Good man. That's an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So you're someone at a pretty young age that achieved remarkable success. When you look at your life thus far, what experiences really shaped your leadership style and advice you have for emerging leaders looking to accelerate their own growth? What do you say?
So I would say my life was incredibly shaped by one man called Julian Robertson, who was the founder of Tiger Management. And he took me under his wing when I was 19 and moved to the States. And he really built great confidence in what I could build at Crimson, and also took me under his wing as an investor at Tiger Management. And he was in his 80s at this stage. And he's well known for sort of shepherding this era of hedge fund managers, the likes of firms like Lone Pine and Viking and Tiger Global, which have gone on to become prominent funds around the world. But I guess seeing him in his 80s, I was able to really reflect on the how and the why he was able to build this epic impact as a leader and also as a source of values and really an ambassador for great integrity and conduct in the folks he interacted with. So I think he, even though he's passed away now, remains, besides my own
Mm.
family, certainly the single most influential fellow to me. And, I think he combined a ferocious kind of competitive spirit with a really kind-hearted, love of, his community and great values. And certainly he really helped me get comfortable in the States and take the ambition that I had in New Zealand and kind of turbocharge it when I got here. So I'm very grateful to the impact he had on me. And I can speak to a number of other mentors, but I think the
Mm.
general reflection of my life is through each phase, I've typically had one or two incredibly influential mentors that have sort of had more confidence in me than I probably deserved at that point. And then it really, motivated me to dream higher. And I've tried to really, I guess, as much as possible, mentor a next generation within our organization, Crimson, and within our students as well, kind of reflecting on the impact those mentors have had on my own life.
I'm wondering how you met him and what you think he saw in you.
So I met him in New Zealand when I interviewed for his Robertson scholarship. And it was quite funny because at the time he had a thick accent from North Carolina, and I'd never heard of such a thing in my life. And I actually couldn't quite decipher what he was saying at the start. And it was a real southern, kick to it. And so it took me sort of 10 minutes to like get accustomed. But then once was able to follow, we had a good discussion. And I guess a year later, I dropped him a cold email, and his scholarship was using Crimson to provide SAT tutoring for these kids before they got into Duke University, which was the university his scholarship had endowed, and reached out to him, met him in New York. And very quickly in that first meeting, we really developed some strong affinity. He loves the country of New Zealand. He sort of took to my family story, and I guess also to probably my ambitious approach to what I was trying to build, and also the quick traction that I had at Crimson. And I think we really connected on a very values level as well. And so I think from there, he was keen to kind of help me in the various ways he could, which was, investing in my business and becoming a mentor there, and also hiring me to work for his firm. And that was very unusual. Normally, if you're an investor, you don't want to have someone sort of working a job that's different to the thing you just invested in. So he was kind of really all in on me and had a lot of, I guess, openness to help me learn as well, encouraged me to even go to business school and stuff, which is quite unusual as
Yeah.
well for a young entrepreneur. If you've just invested in them, you don't want them off doing an MBA or something. So he took a lot of quite unusual steps in that journey. And, I guess I felt incredibly grateful for his support and belief. And it, made me hustle extra hard.
You mentioned your family story resonated with him. You shared values. Was there a connection between the values you shared and that family story?
Yeah, I guess I grew up with a single mother in New Zealand, and, she basically raised me and was building her company from scratch. And she'd been to this very messy divorce. So she kind of had me. She was really starting from zero, and she was kind of building this company while bringing me to business meetings and taking me off to tutoring on the weekends and teaching me all these different subjects herself. So I think seeing her resilience and strength, both as a education inspiration, and that she did a lot of various studies at university. She did an MBA degree, a law degree, a commerce degree, then
Oh,
also
wow.
seeing her entrepreneurial kind of firepower as well. I think subconsciously really made me think, hey, my mom's taking things so seriously. I need to as well. And, I felt that responsibility. So I think he could tell early on that I was very close to my family, my grandparents as well, my granddad being kind of like my father figure in my life. And I think he also really takes his family incredibly seriously, cherished his late wife and his kids and everything. And there was that love of competition in the business world, but also a real sense of community. And I think even though we're from different parts of the world, he kind of connected well and really saw that alignment too.
Yeah, there is so much I love about that story and your start and all the things you have accomplished in a very short time frame for a relatively young person. And one of the things that I think is really interesting to me is the number of people I've met through the years who are, maybe my age, which is old, and like, "Hey, I just got my first passport." And I go like, "You got to be kidding me." Really, you have traveled the globe and you work with all kinds of people. And I think for someone who's had so many positive influences in their life at a very young age, like in very defining positive influences, how much has travel and culture and having a worldview affected your perspective on things?
It's been massively influential. I think growing up in New Zealand, it's a small country, 4.5 million people, go on five, corner of the world. most flights, I like to joke with Americans, they're shocked when I tell them it's sort of 18 hours to fly from New York to New Zealand or something. And I think when you grow up in New Zealand, it's such a beautiful country, but also it's quite disconnected from sort of the beating heart of the world in some regards. And, you see that economically, our economy was pretty fine during the recession, for example, but you don't necessarily see some of the high intensity culture seen in other parts of the world, at least in high school attitudes towards education, etc. So when I began traveling, I visited places like Singapore and China, and I felt sort of that ambition within these high school cohorts, within the parent communities, and that really desire to lift up the next generation. I think it really did offer me a more rounded perspective in the world. And I sort of looked at that balanced Kiwi life, that really work life balance type ethos, and then sort of the supercharged Korea China style approach. And then I guess in America, I sort of found this in between, which certainly is a place that loves play and friendship and everything, but is also quite a high intensity competitive country on the grand scheme of, Western society. More generally, I would say, it's been one of the joys of my life building Crimson in 20 plus countries, and all these places we've got local teams with local employees in Japan and even Russia for a long time, Korea, India, and stuff. And so I've had to learn how to do business in many different cultures and communities, and also kind of customize our offerings to those segments. So I think that has given me a bit of a global perspective. And it's also made me more reflective on some of the things I love about New Zealand and also some of the things that I think can be improved as a society.
Now, so when you take a look at, let's say, if you go to a McDonald's here in the US, or you go to a McDonald's in France, or you go to a McDonald's in China or something like that, it's the same, but it's different. Okay. And leadership is generally the same across the board, but people are different a little bit. How would you set the lay of the land globally? Like, what are the things that, if you could name like two, three things that doesn't matter where you go, this is the same. And here are the things that tend to change by region, by area, and how you need to be a leader.
I think the most notable thing about different cultural backgrounds, or a couple, but one of them would be how you give feedback. I think in certain cultures, for example, like Japan or China, if you give feedback and you're hierarchically someone's boss, or maybe your boss's boss or something like this, that can be received very negatively. And you've got to really think about how you delicately give this feedback, often by kind of passing it down the hierarchy and having sort of the appropriate person deliver that feedback. And there really is such a respect for hierarchy that sort of you can really cause a lot of public shame or public angst by skipping that hierarchy and kind of breaking the cultural norms of communication. On the flip side, in a place like America or New Zealand, a very authentic, honest, fast paced, blunt culture that's still respectful, but overlooks a lot of those traditional hierarchies can be quite effective. And so I think that's one thing that I've noticed for sure. I think the second thing probably would be around, just natural attitudes towards work. This sounds probably a little bit controversial, but, in, for example, Beijing or Shanghai, you have this thing called 996, or, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, which is sort of like the startup culture. And then, in a place like New Zealand, it's definitely a place which values sort of the 40-hour work week. And the idea that, you have many, many separate parts of your identity, and work's only one of those dimensions. And so being adaptable to kind of lift your team up from a high performance standpoint, but also adapt the kind of cultural norms. And I think also not necessarily take it like in some of the Asian countries, the work culture is so intense. Actually, we've done quite well by offering people a bit of a softer alternative where they're still going very, very hard, but it isn't the crazy culture of some of the local firms, which means you've got quite a hiring advantage. Similarly, in a place like New Zealand or Australia, we're higher intensity, but a lot of folks seek that out about Crimson, and they like that ambitious culture. So there are a couple of, I would say, differences. When it comes to similarities, people love to be on a winning team. I think if you have that fast-paced intensity, ambitious goals, the ability for fast career progression, fast learning, that is addictive to people anywhere, and that's definitely very infectious. And, I think people just love to be able to take their ideas, have them transmitted through to action. And if you have a, bureaucracy where sort of ideas go to die at lower levels, that stifles innovation. And so as much as possible, having that ability to foster innovation and then have someone be able to contribute their ideas, that is a real driver of action and excitement. So I think there are a couple of observations that I have from the different parts of the world. I think in general, our company actually has a quite large concentration of folks from various Asian countries, and my co-founder is Chinese. And, culturally, a lot of China and India really values education a lot. And so it's been very interesting kind of navigating that kind of cultural adaptation for me as well, coming from, New Zealand, and then catering to sort of those different segments and markets over time.
Jamie, I spoke to a guy today, teaches at Georgetown as an adjunct leadership, a refugee from Serbia, Yugoslavia. Really interesting guy. And one of the things he's trying to figure out is how to acquire more knowledge faster. And, a lot of what you do is, secrets to gaining admission to the world's top universities. Part of me is thinking a couple things. One, how relevant is that still? Do we need to acquire more knowledge faster, or do we need to acquire the right knowledge faster? And how is all this related being a forward-thinking leader?
It's a great question. I mean, I think in general, there is a flick switch type thing around curiosity where some folks are intensely curious and others, may be less so. And I think that's a little bit binary in my experience, where people are either keen to learn in the different formats. It could be podcasts, it could be coaching calls, it could be speaking to friends, or they might be kind of quite complacent where they stand. And so often for our students, the first thing we're trying to do is flick that curiosity switch and make sure they're fired up about whatever they're doing. Sometimes that switch can turn off in someone if they've sort of been in a sort of lull state for too long. So finding ways to reignite that curiosity is certainly powerful. I think beyond that, I like to learn really broadly across both, various degrees, advisory boards, investors, employees, folks outside of my own Crimson network as well. I think that often, learning the right things is hard to perfectly know. And so, direction of travel, you want high intensity learning consumption, and then you'll probably find your way within this. But I tend to kind of go for the baptism by fire, kind of, throw yourself into pools of knowledge and then pull out the things you need. I've often found sort of like breakthrough ideas in Crimson accidentally. For example, we moved into the online schooling space by accident because I took this education degree at Stanford, met a professor that was quite inspiring and had this novel insight. We developed a psychometric matching tool that matches students and tutors based on personality, based on this random encounter I had with this guy who was the chief science officer of eHarmony. Time and time again, many of our breakthrough ideas came from very random interactions. And so I think you can't be overly restricted about what you study. I've probably taken that to a bit of an extreme in terms of some of the academic subjects that I've kept studying. But I think in general, high curiosity, high intensity learning, and I don't mind if you kind of overlearn or, learn for the sake of it for a little bit. That's better than being overly restrictive as to what you focus on.
Well, Jim and I really, I mean, there's a lot to digest there.
Yeah.
Right before we got on the call with you, Jim and I were talking about being relevant. And we were saying that one of the ways that we think we've stayed relevant is being curious, asking, lots of questions on this podcast. Um, how do you ensure, again, if you're consuming a lot of information, and again, some things hit, some things miss, what's your advice to stay focused and relevant, as a leader, and that you make yourself easy to follow, that you're not chasing the shiny new object everywhere and all over the place, that not everybody might be able to keep up with you as a leader if you're super high IQ, super curious, super high intensity? How do you make sure you're relevant and focused?
So I found the best way that I've done this at Crimson, and to be honest, I had this problem in the early years where, I was thinking about what's the next big growth vertical for us. I was bounced around a lot and it would kind of cause swirling chaos in our teams because there wouldn't be that disciplined focus that's required for execution. I found as I built out a leadership team and I have, dedicated CEOs of our various business units, our online school, our college admissions business, our online study resource business, our tutoring academies, other things. Those people were able to bottle my intensity and curiosity, but then filter that through into, clear operating metrics that their team could follow, and they could distill things and sort of, filter the information through. So I think it's really about making sure you have the right organizational design. I have my splinter teams, almost the agents of chaos, the folks who don't mind that swirling mess of kind of early stage excitement. And I go to these guys with my new ideas and, new initiatives. And then I have sort of our execution team that really is focused on continual operational performance within our key business lines. We're actually, a bit of vortex of new ideas, maybe a bit distracting for them. So I think it actually becomes an organizational design, people hiring type question. And you really want to know who are the folks that are best placed at execution and who are the folks that actually have those kind of early stage 0 to 1 characters who love the messiness. In fact, too much structure is almost like poison for them. So that's probably how I think about it over time. And, I think as we've been able to segment those characters, we've seen a lot of explosive growth.
I'll share a quick bias. it seems that the people we've had on the show that are really smart are the people that can manage creative people. I mean,
Yeah.
just
Jamie, let me ask you a quick question. Have you read Loon Shots by Safi Bakal?
I haven't. What was the title again?
Loon Shots.
Okay,
LOON.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
You need to meet Saf.
Yeah, you need to not only meet him, but you need to read that book because what you just described was basically his research and his study on managing that creative tension
Yeah.
between. I mean, I was just listening to you. I'm like, you're just basically reciting in a very quick summary Safi Bakal's book, which was, I think one of the better books that we've read in all the years we've been
Yep.
doing this. I thought that one
Yeah.
really changed my mind. So that's pretty cool stuff. Yeah.
And real quick before we go on, just a reminder to thank our sponsor, Darley. 4 generations of industry leadership, a laser focus on quality and service, and that's Darley's DNA. So they're a great firm that's trusted solutions for first responders and warfighters, and it really ties into everything that we've been talking about. They typify exactly what you've described. Jim, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I want to talk about for a moment top talent and top universities. So I was at a wedding recently for my godson, and he's a Notre Dame grad, married a gal from Notre Dame, and big wedding party, all from Notre Dame. So we're sitting at the rehearsal dinner, and one by one, they all get up and start giving speeches. Okay. First one gets up, gives this fantastic speech, better than most that you hear. I'm like, wow, that's gonna be tough to top. Next person gets up, knocks it out of the park again. Men, women, both sides, they were phenomenal. Okay. And one after another, and they all had a different theme, a different way. They closed it up nicely. I was just so impressed. And I looked over at my wife and I said, these are the people who are going to be running things in a few years because this was just a room chocked with talent. Okay. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, we heard in recent years people saying, hey, we're not going to hire from these top institutions anymore. Like, we're not really happy with what they're putting out. And so we're a little bit jaded by some of these top institutions. I'm interested in what you're seeing. And I'm really interested in saying, instead of defining top institutions, what is top talent to you?
Top talent for me is all about learning agility and ambition. I think time and time again at Crimson, I've had folks with me for 7, 8, 9 years in this journey. My co-founder Fungzhou, and he began this with me when he was 18, couldn't speak much English. And over the last 11 years, it's been incredible to watch him kind of grow, iterate, pick up new knowledge, take on feedback. Coming from a Chinese culture, I remember he had this one employee to manage who was this guy. He was in his 50s, the Stanford MBA, and he wasn't performing very well. And culturally, it was so hard for Fengzhou to give that guy critical feedback and actually be direct to him because of the age gap and how disrespectful that would be within Chinese culture. And watching him kind of go to now managing hundreds of employees and building out high performing products across different cultural groups, different engineering teams, amazing. So I would say learning agility, where you're looking for interpersonal feedback about yourself, your own leadership style, content knowledge is getting leveled up, your approach is getting leveled up. You don't view feedback as some sort of negative thing, but actually as sort of like this addictive fuel for more growth. That's very powerful. Then secondly, ambition. The desire to build something exciting. I think that really fuels someone. And, at Crimson, we definitely attract these ambitious folks who want to be part of building something great. So I think those two things would be critical. And then thirdly, integrity as well, of course, folks that really share the same values that you do and their values compounders where you know that when they're a part of the organization, they strengthen it. And without you looking, they make it better and stronger. So there are a couple of the traits that I would say I look for in our best folks.
Yeah. I'm curious because I guess I agree with that. And I really like the way you frame that. I guess I'd add in, and I'm not sure if you characterize learning agility as the same thing, but just the kind of Socratic critical thinking that gets you to kind of question dogma. And, I think that's something that I think entrepreneurs typically have in spades. Maybe that's learning agility as you describe it, but I think there are lots of people can get great grades and they follow the rules and they're within the system. And within the system, they're awesome. But once you get them out of the system, it's like, I don't play as well with rules. I mean, do you encapsulate that in the way you define learning agility, or what is your thought on that?
Absolutely. Someone who just gets a lot of good grades, I wouldn't necessarily even categorize that as learning agility. I think a lot of folks can go through kind of conventional academics, crank out exams, study content, follow these rules, and be very ineffective when it comes to understanding, organizations and, the complexity of the real world. So I think often folks that have the horsepower to thrive academically can have very high learning agility. But I know many, many folks that find that academic realm sort of the peak to some extent of their learning environment and they really struggle outside of it. I've seen that a lot actually. So yeah, I would say you can have someone with extreme learning agility with no formal education. It really just comes down to that attitude and some degree, some sort of instinctual insight about organizations, people's cultures, structures, and how they can kind of move and navigate through those environments.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So, Jamie, I'm wondering, well, a lot of times when we're coaching folks, I say, hey, an exercise I'd love for you to do is to look in the mirror and answer this question. Am I easy to follow? You're obviously a very smart person, very ambitious. How do you make sure that you're easy to follow?
I would say at certain points, I wasn't easy to follow. And it's certainly something where I tried to kind of combat that by bringing on board folks in my team that were easier to follow, that were able to build faster connections with our team. I think of my co founder, Chandra, who's a very natural leader, and she really is able to kind of rally the troops effectively. Over time, hopefully, I've inherited some of these things through osmosis. But yeah, I would say at the start, I certainly wasn't. Over time, I think for me, it comes down to like, within a larger organization, who are the various leaders that release certain messages, information filtering, making sure I'm really cognizant of kind of what my team needs of me in a certain interaction, how much structure and focus versus creativity they need. And I think being very adaptable to what the team requires is very important. So I would say it's something that I'm always working on because I think probably initially I was more like heavy on the strategy side, but I wasn't as strong as sort of rallying the troops and bringing them along on that journey. And I think I struggled a lot actually in some of the early years of Crimson with that and have kind of worked on it over time.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've really worked on self-awareness and knowing that, to put strong people where you're not as strong. Again, being driven, ambitious, really knowing where you're going, being strategic. How do you make sure that you make the time for the relationship, which can seem sometimes it might feel like a waste of time? How do you make sure that you're investing in those in a way that's strategic and pragmatic and tactical?
It's a great question. I think over the years at Crimson, I've seen, for example, the impact of in-person offsites, time together, 2, 3 days in person, and how much impact that has compared to, a year of Zoom calls. I think about, literally the impact. Like an hour in real life builds more trust than probably like 30 hours of Zoom calls or something. And so I really think about making sure that I'm often on the plane because I'm visiting teams in person, spending time with those leaders, building relations with those country managers. My own exec team, we just did an offsite in New Zealand. So I flew back actually 18 hours for this 2-day event, then flew back here because that
Wow.
in time is, I think so important. So I think, especially in a Zoom global, almost metaverse like environment like today, when many companies are so dispersed, making sure that you are spending time very intentionally with those folks in your team, that's really important. And I think you can feel almost the morale of the organization ebb and flow with too much distance. Some of that trust starts to fray, arguments start to splinter up. You don't have that natural goodwill. And that's sort of like something you always need to kind of rejuvenate with that time together. And it's a very humanistic kind of experience. So I think the in person time is really a must. And just being really conscious of people's lives beyond their work, where they're at and their own adventures. And understanding kind of their own perspectives actually helps you think about, their own career path, how you can support that, where they are at their stage. We've had plenty of folks, for example, come to Crimson and then, leave, come back as a boomerang when, the stage was right for them. And so just being very cognizant of kind of, what they're going through and having that empathy is very important as well.
Yeah. So, Jamie, you've got
Mm.
a million great ideas. I mean, you articulate yourself exceptionally well. We started a little bit about with your story, which I think is fascinating. I want to get more into that. And for someone as driven and as capable as you are, you've probably pushed yourself at some point to where you're like, that went too far. Do you have a story about your experience that was maybe a seminal moment for you to gain either, you know, some massive learning or reflection on self-awareness? Is there a story that you can share that might be pretty powerful for us?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. And I can think of several. They're all quite gnarly. I'm trying to find one that's sort of a good balance. Probably the one that comes to mind is when I first began Crimson, I'd kind of gone through my college years and I'd raised the Series B round. We'd raised about 30 million in venture funding from this great fund called Tiger Global. And I just recently gained admission to business school at Stanford. And I had this view in my mind that, I'm going to be doing this for a long time. Every year is going to get more hectic. I should go to business school sooner rather than later because I'm going to acquire all these skills that will help me kind of grow into the leader that I want to be. And, I really sort of respect traditional education. So I figured it would actually be quite helpful. I think that first year that I was at Stanford, there was a lot of compulsory time in California, which took me out from my team physically. Of course, I was always connected digitally, but that was a real cluster where I had basically some investors that were initially frustrated by that choice to be in business school. They thought this is a little bit, distracting. And over time, they saw sort of the value of it as it started, I kind of played out this thesis. But at the time, we didn't have the trust built. And when I hopped off to business school, it was a little bit jarring. And then at the same time, my team, I had some, all these folks in New Zealand and, here I was in this different time zone. And it's easy to feel, even if I'm extremely dialed into Crimson, that physical absence being in California where my team's there, it seems like I'm not as engaged or obsessed as they are. And the pain they're feeling during those growth challenges, I'm sort of divorced from. And I think that put a lot of mental strain on me where that first year I felt like I was really under the pump because we were growing into all these countries. Our cash burn was pretty high. There was some real existential risks for our company in those years. And I was very isolated from the team. And at the same time, I was really focused on my Crimson work. And so I wasn't really engaging with sort of like the social community of the business school. I was just doing sort of academics calls, sleeping, kind of repeating. And it was, high intensity hours. And so I think that was probably I wouldn't say a breaking point, but I was certainly at one of the, darkest times as far as that choice. I think on reflection, it was probably still worth it. That time at business school helped me get ideas to launch our online high school, which has become a big part of the business. It helped me recruit our Japanese country manager, Ed, who's been a rock star, and build a set of leadership skills that's helped me kind of keep scaling with Crimson, probably 8 years later. But at the time, it was a very stomach churning trade off where I was sort of annoying a bunch of people by making this call, which seemed selfish or short sighted initially, I think. So that probably was a gnarly one.
Yeah. So, clearly you had some people who doubted your decision. Did you ever doubt your own decision? Did you ever get to a point where you're like, I don't know if I did the right thing here?
I think that I had a pretty clear sense that I was looking to build this over the long run. I've been building Crimson now for 12 years. And my instinct was that I was a young guy from college from New Zealand. I had some good ideas as to how to build this thing, but I was quite a raw canvas when it came to business knowledge. And knowing myself, I just always feel much more comfortable if I've sort of like learnt the material, studied the course, I've got some core training, then I can grow and adapt. But at least I don't feel like I'm sort of like playing from a disadvantage. And so for me, it felt quite critical to kind of get that experience. And so I would say it was painful because it felt like people that, had trust in me couldn't see what I was trying to do. And perhaps their lack of confidence in the decision reflected a lack of confidence in the broader long term game plan and kind of how big we were trying to build. So I think that was probably painful, but I think I remained convicted in the decision. And as I got out of that high intensity first year with all of the in person kind of participation requirements, then I began to kind of get my mojo firing and people sort of got back and got excited and pumped about the trajectory. But I think I did not lose the self confidence in that year, although it was quite dark.
Was it ambition that got you through that? What was it that got you through that? Was it that was your North Star? Was it your upbringing with your mom and your grandfather? What was it that got you through all that?
I guess I felt I had this thriving team and this organization. People had put a lot of trust in me, and I felt sort of enormous responsibility to crank it. And then also, I just felt we could build something a lot more exciting. And this was only the very, very beginning. So probably it was a combination of a sense of responsibility and that ambition and belief in what we could build. Some combination of that, I think. And then, of course, my co-founders, particularly Chandra, who was very instrumental in supporting me when she was in New Zealand. I was in California, kind of double teaming to get this thing rolling. And so I think the way that my co-founders and I tag teamed that year and kind of covered for each other was really important. And, we were able to sort of get through it all and then acquire a lot of this knowledge, level up. And then actually over time, I graduated. Then, now my co-founder Fungzhou, he's doing his MBA. And, it's been sort of a tag team staggering. Since we began this so young, we've had to kind of mix in our education as we've built. So over time, we got more and more dialed at this sort of process, which has been quite funny. But it has meant we've been able to stick to our value of leveling up and staying agile and kind of bringing in new knowledge. And it's definitely now become quite a distinctive part of our culture where we have a unusually high number of our staff, doing different education pursuits while they work at Crimson.
Hmm. Jamie and Jim, I'm wondering, either of you are watching the series on Apple, Prime Target?
I haven't seen that yet. Good.
So
It sounds exciting.
it's a brilliant Cambridge math student on the verge of a major breakthrough when a shadowy enemy tries to stop him. Anyway, the show's really good. And I'm not a math guru, but I have a hard time following some of the math stuff.
I'm gonna have to check it out.
But anyway, Jamie, as you were describing Stanford, I thought about this show. There's like the final episode, number 8, comes out this Wednesday. And anyway, I think you'd like it. Jamie, as we kind of wrap up, you said something that really stuck with me, the curiosity switch. And it reminds me, we had a really wonderful guest on a long time ago that we thought before the show came on, we're like, Jim, why are we having an illusionist, a magician on the show?
We've had him on the show twice.
Yeah. And he was one of the best guests ever, one of the greatest minds about leadership. And he talked about the wonder switch. And I'm thinking that the wonder switch is the same thing you're talking about with the curiosity switch. And to me, that's the big takeaway for anybody listening. If their curiosity switch isn't on, Jamie, what do they need to do to get that thing turned on? Because what you talked about is you switch that on, it changes your life.
So let me speak to that for a second. If you think about the difference between that switch being on and off, right? So when the curiosity switch is on, every day you're working, it doesn't feel like you're working. It feels like this exciting, adrenaline-packed, exhilarating adventure. And so time moves faster. You get a lot of things done. You have a lot more energy. You wake up pumped. It's a totally different mental feeling. When the curiosity switch is off, you're dreading the next day. You're dreading kind of any new kind of task. You're sort of like almost waiting in shelter for the sort of pain to go away because, it feels like a arduous journey just getting through the day. So I think this curiosity thing is one of the most fundamental, and a huge portion of the workforce have the switch off because they don't enjoy what they're currently doing. I think the way you unlock the curiosity switch, there are a couple of things. The first is you've got to ask yourself a hard question. Am I doing something right now that I want to be doing in 5 or 10 years? A lot of the time, if you think about it, can I do this for another 3 months? The answer is yes. But if you feel like you're structurally in the wrong lane for you and that's not changing, it's time to really think about spicing things up a little bit. That could be switching to a different role, could be a different company, it could be time to go do some study and reset, reflect. It could be relationships in your life that aren't really activating and fulfilling you. Maybe you're giving a lot to certain relationships and you're not really having that, mental spark or whatever. So I think there are a couple of things. There are a lot of activities that sap curiosity. So I think about young kids today and things like TikTok, YouTube, a lot of social media content. These environments where you're engaging with these kind of addictive AI algorithms spit out content that just sort of like sucks your attention, drains your focus. Ironically, you can be consuming a lot of content, but it can be sort of really destroying your curiosity because it's very hard for you to replicate that kind of curiosity from a sort of more slow duration type source like a book. And so you kind of go back to these algorithms to feed that, but it sort of actually numbs your kind of intrinsic curiosity in some ways. So I think often you've got to like do a bit of a digital detox, figure out kind of what's going on online, what are you consuming? Key relationships, are you sort of really losing your energy somewhere from some sort of not so positive thing in your life? And then, what's the work dynamics like? Are you excited by the current? Are you excited by the future? Are you still learning in the role? There are a couple of the checks that I would do around that curiosity.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jamie, this has been fantastic. Thank you for your insights. You're a super impressive guy.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate the discussion. And I'm going to go watch this Prime Target and I'm going to read this book. I believe it was Loon Shots. So I'll report back.
You're going to like that one a lot. I know you're
Yeah.
going to love that book. For our listeners, you're going to love this episode, but that's all we have for you this week. We'll include ways for you to connect with Jamie in our show notes. So make sure to visit us at theleadershippodcast.com. And remember, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Benjamin Franklin.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rofke Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.